Hello and welcome to Piano Shack with me, Woody. I've been waiting almost 30 years to share this story with somebody, and at last I think I have an audience who may be interested. It's about me when I was a scientist, two $50,000 digital recorders, a military base in the Bahamas, the US Navy, helicopters, and a torpedo. And no, I'm not making this stuff up. Indeed, when I was a teenager in the UK, I was working as an apprentice scientist. My actual job title was Assistant Scientific Officer. And this was at a military research establishment. And yes, this all sounds a little bit Stranger Things, doesn't it? But it just gets better. And the department where I was working was developing torpedo technology. So although I wasn't a rocket scientist, I certainly was a torpedo or a missile scientist, you could say. In fact, the department where I was working was responsible for designing countermeasures. These are devices that would stop a torpedo from ruining the day of a surface ship or a submarine. And all of this was very hush-hush at the time. In some projects, we would collaborate with the Yanks, which is where the US Navy comes into this story. One of my responsibilities at the time was acoustic data capture and analysis. What that meant is that we often went out to sea or worked in big acoustic tanks in our laboratories, and we put underwater microphones into the sea. They're called hydrophones. My job was to connect the hydrophones and the sonar equipment to reel-to-reel analog recorders and capture the data that they were picking up. And this was either in our laboratories or out on a research ship or a naval vessel in the North Atlantic. And then we take this data back to our laboratories and analyze it. And my job was to write the computer programs that would process that data and print it out on plotters. Remember those XY plotters where a pen would move around on a bit of paper? Well, I wrote the programs to analyze the acoustic signals and plot that onto the paper. So I want to share with you some of the details about these old reel-to-reel tape recorders because they're quite interesting. They're similar to what a professional recording studio would have used, but with slightly different specifications because these things were built to measure signals from transducers and sensors to a very, very high degree of accuracy. In a recording studio, you're typically recording onto tape up to 15 kilohertz or 20 kilohertz, but our tape recorders went all the way up to about 80 or 100 kilohertz, way beyond what you can hear. I think that's really interesting. Let's go over to the computer and I'll tell you a little bit about instrumentation data recorders. Wow, I bet you never thought you'd see this on my channel. I'll tell you about their shortcomings and then I'll tell you about what I discovered in the pages of Sound on Sound magazine that we purchased to replace these old tape dinosaurs. I found a random forum thread from a chap in the UK who's selling one of these for about £500 today. Now that's a bit of a bargain. When we bought these back in the 80s, they would have been £25,000 each. That's about $30,000, and adjusted for inflation today, that's £50,000. He's got some nice photos. Let's scroll up to the top and take a look. So what you're looking at here is the Ampex SE7000. The same tape machine was made by EMI and Penny Giles as well. And look, it says scrap on it. This could be one of the actual tape machines that I was using back in the day that's been decommissioned. Some specs: this was a 14-track recorder and you could plug in different modules depending on what type of signals you were trying to record. I won't bore you with the technical details, and to be honest, I don't really remember, but there were things like FM modules and DC modules. Here you can see it does look rather scientific, doesn't it, compared to what a studio recorder would have looked like for audio. And this is an example of a laboratory instrumentation data recorder. So this was able to capture much higher frequencies than a typical studio recorder. Here you can see there was one card for each track. Here you see the different tape speed settings. The frequency response would change depending on the tape speeds. We were often recording up to 80 kilohertz, and then the tapes would last about half an hour if I recall correctly. Your fabulous transport controls. And I got to know these machines quite well. I could have probably spooled up one of these tapes in my sleep. I'm not even sure if that's the correct term, spooled up. I don't remember what we used to call it. The tapes were 1 inch thick and each tape cost about £100 back then. That's about £200 in today's money, and that got you 30 minutes of data. You can see he's even got some Ampex tapes there. That's pretty awesome. The instructions there, how to spool it up. Thread it past the tape heads and through the capstans and the winders or whatever these things were called. This is the same technology that we had been using for about 30 years in our laboratories. And the problem with these is that the signal to noise ratio wasn't very good. I think the dynamic range was about 60 dBs, meaning that the noise level was quite high, which meant that if you were trying to record some very faint sonar data, then it could even get lost in the noise floor. The other issue is the recording medium itself. As I said, the tapes were very expensive and very bulky. The storage of these became a problem because they just took so much space. And remember, the data that we were capturing on the tapes was classified as well, so all of these had to be locked away in safes. At this time, I was already into synthesizers and music tech, and I used to read Sound on Sound every month. And this is the issue from March 1990, where I saw a potential solution to our problem. You can see on the front here, Akai Digital Multitrack was one of the items that was featured in this issue. It was a rather inconspicuous article, Digital Multitrack in North Wales. And digital multitracking was a very new thing in 1990, only available to the very highest end studios. The model number here is the Akai DR1200, called the ADAM. You can see a picture there, a diagram showing how the data is striped to the tape. Now, let's have a look. Akai's DR1200 is a 12-track digital recorder based around the Video 8 cassette format. I don't remember much about the Video 8s, but I remember these cassettes were about a third the size of a VHS video cassette. A quick look at the specifications whilst we're on this page. Recording format, ADAM, Akai Digital Audio Multitrack format. You can see it's recording at CD quality. The recording time, 16 minutes, which could have been a problem in a recording studio if you were trying to record a very long track, a concept album or something. Signal to noise ratio we can see is 90 dBs, and this is a massive improvement over what we were getting with our analog tapes. This was one of the big selling points for us, and also the size of the recording format. With this system, you could do a whole month of sea trials and just come home with a suitcase full of tapes. So the device consisted of 3 different modules. Here's the biggest one. This is the tape transport machine. Let's just read the summary before we go further. Apart from that, the Akai DR1200 seems to have a lot of potential, bringing digital multitrack down to a level that more studios and perhaps individuals can afford. No way can individuals afford this. Well, perhaps some could, but I'm going to show you the price in a minute. It was pretty much out of reach. The sound quality is distinctly better than analog tape without noise reduction. Comparative tests with reel-to-reel digital multitracks are definitely called for. Here we have a better picture of the whole system. Let's have a look. A bit grainy, but you can see the tape playback module over there. This is the meter unit, and over here is the control unit. Another picture here from home studio recording, June 1989. You can see the 3 units that we just talked about. Let's just check the prices. They were on the previous page. The first affordable digital multi-track, 12 to 36 tracks. You could combine up to 3 of these to get more tracks if you wanted. The prices then, the actual recorder itself was £14,000. The control unit was £1,000 and the meter set was a very reasonable £700. We bought 2 of these to have a bit of redundancy. You don't want to be out in the middle of the ocean and have one of these go wrong, so we always bought 2 of everything. That would have been £50,000 back then. In today's money, that's £100,000 adjusted for inflation. £100,000, that's about $120,000. I showed it to our principal scientific officer and let him read through the article, and he agreed with me that it was worth investigating. And a huge thanks from me goes out to Ben at musines.co.uk for providing the scans that I've been using in this presentation. So we got in touch with Akai and they sent a guy down with one of these systems that we could test out in the lab. And if I recall correctly, there was only one other place in the whole of the UK that had ordered one of these prior to us. It did look quite promising, but we had to ask Akai to make a modification for us. You see, we were typically recording signals that had frequencies higher than 20 kilohertz. So instead of actually capturing the waveform at whatever frequency it was, we'd capture the envelope of the waveform. We were more interested in the shape of the signal. You know, if you hear the sound of a sonar ping in a submarine film, yeah, what we were trying to do is capture the shape of that ping. And to do that, we needed to modify these recorders so that they'd record all the way down to DC, 0 hertz. And yeah, after doing that, we ordered 2 of them, and these machines became my world for the next 6 months and my responsibility. And I feel quite proud even today that I ushered in this new generation of digital audio multi-track recording in my research establishment, and all thanks to the pages of Sound on Sound magazine. So as part of our collaborations with the Americans, we flew 2 Akai ADAMs. We put them in a porter cabin. This is like a shipping container that's converted into a portable laboratory. We flew those over to the Bahamas, where the Americans had a naval base. We put our hydrophones into the water, and I was responsible for capturing the acoustic data that our hydrophones were picking up in the sea, whilst the Americans were playing with their submarines and torpedoes. So this was quite a big responsibility resting on my 19-year-old shoulders, especially since it was my recommendation to purchase these Akai ADAM digital multitracks. We later learned that these recorders were quite unreliable even in a controlled studio environment. So imagine how they were going to fare on the back deck of a ship in a container pitching around on the sea with all the salt air to contend with. Before you could record anything onto the tape, you had to play through the tape first and format it. And this at times was very, very troublesome. I remember being under a huge amount of pressure to get the recording equipment ready. The Americans were ready to launch their torpedo or whatever it was that they were going to do. The helicopters were buzzing around and ready to go. And here I was getting format errors on the old Akai ADAM. Yeah, that's right, I was desperately swabbing the heads with cleaning fluids and running cleaning tapes through the units, aligning the heads and swapping out the different machines. It was incredibly stressful. It did eventually work out. Thank goodness we have 2 of them, and we got the data that we needed. For a while there, the reputation of the British scientific community was resting squarely on my shoulders. You might be wondering what happened to these mega expensive digital recorders after our sea trials. Well, technology was moving very fast at this time, and new digital multi-track recorders were being launched all the time, and these things became obsolete fairly quickly, I believe. And this is about the time I came to Sweden, so I don't know exactly what happened to them, but it could have been one of 2 things. They were either thrown in a skip, which would have been a great shame, or auctioned off for peanuts. And someone there got a very good deal, I think. So we were one of the very first pioneers to adopt digital multi-track recording. But after that, it became more and more widespread, and the cost of the units came down in price dramatically. Akai launched a 8-track unit called the ADAT, which cost 1/10 of the price, and that was even affordable for consumers. What did I learn from all of this? Well, I have 2 rather vivid memories that I'll share with you to conclude this story. The first is that a US Navy base has an awesome canteen, open 24 hours, any time of the day. You can go there, there's a buffet full of burgers and pizzas. I'm not kidding, it's true, I remember. There were healthy options as well. The second thing that I recall, in the UK, when we play pool, you know, the kind of snooker game that you see in bars and pubs, we play a very safety-orientated game. You're not only trying to put the balls in the pockets, but you're trying to make it hard for your opponents to put the balls in the pockets. You're playing safety shots to make it difficult for them. There was also a bar on this military base, and it had a pool table. Inevitably, I ended up playing pool with a bunch of Marines. I quickly learned that if you played pool the UK way by playing safety shots, you were likely to get your head kicked in by a bunch of very angry Marines. Yeah, you had to try and put the ball in the pocket, otherwise you weren't playing by the rules. So that's the end of this rather bizarre and unbelievable story, but I assure you it is all true. So like the video if you liked it, remember to subscribe. I'll see you again soon. Cheerio.